Good afternoon, everybody. You're very welcome and thank you for joining us on this lovely sunny afternoon. So hopefully we'll make the best of the next hour and let you get back out maybe to see a little bit of that sunshine today. So the first thing I'd like to say is you're very welcome to IOB and to this event where we're going to discuss a lot about fintech over the next hour. And with that in mind, I am absolutely delighted to welcome my three guests here today. So we Frank Kelly and Jackie Main, who are the associate faculty on the programme and the new professional certificate in fintech, and Niall Buckley, who is going to be a guest speaker on the programme and is also going to be speaking for us here today. So I'll talk a little bit more about the guys and give you a little bit more info on them as they get just in a few minutes. In the meantime, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about IOB and a little bit about the programme. So the Institute of Bankers was founded a very, very long time ago in 1898. We are a membership body with just under 34,000 members, mainly across financial services. And at any one time, about 8,300, 8,500 of those members are actually studying programs with us. We also then have just under 24,000 members in our designation schemes. So these are members who have chosen and who have signed up to, I suppose, continue their learning after they finish their actual course that they have covered or program that they've covered. And they are part of a recognized designation scheme. And you can hear more about that again. So what else about IOB? So IOB, we are a recognized college of UCD. All of our programs, the accredited programs, are on the National Framework of Qualifications. And our prime purpose as a membership organisation, as well as an educational organisation, is to provide education, training, skills and knowledge to all those working in or who would like to work in the financial services sector. And as we all know, the Irish financial services sector has been incredibly successful over the last several decades at this stage. I was around myself in the beginning in the 80s when it started out, so it's great to still be here today and see it have grown to, I suppose, the levels that it has and employing the number of people that it does. Just again, a little bit about IOB. So our purpose is mainly to educate, enable and empower a community of professionals to fulfill their full potential in delivering financial services and most importantly, ensuring in that delivery that they achieve the highest outcomes for customers. So just that underpins and underlies all of the education and all of the training and all of the events that we do. So just to keep that in mind. So to the topic of the day, fintech. So the guys here who are joining me are going to speak to this in detail. But I suppose, what is fintech? How has it come about? Why is it important? And how does it impact? So it ties in very closely to the increased digitalization that's been happening throughout the financial services sector. And as we've all seen, particularly through the pandemic, we've all been, I suppose, positive recipients of being able to continue everything we have normally do in our day-to-day lives, other than the go out and have the enjoyment side. But at least on the other side, in the banking and the financial sector, the industry has been able to continue and to develop and to prosper. And digitalization, I suppose, has been the thing that's enabled that to happen. And fintech is an aspect of that, and we're going to talk more to that today. The program itself that we're launching, the Professional Certificate in Fintech, which is a level 7 program, is specifically aimed at those either working in risk and compliance in financial services organizations that are using or going to use fintech, but equally to those that are providing services to those regulated financial services bodies or advising financial services bodies. Or even regulating financial services bodies. So it is a very broad remit because it covers, I suppose, from the inception of fintech and the regulatory environment in which it operates, and it speaks then and marries those with the skills needed for risk and compliance. There's a particular focus in the AML sector and anti-money laundering and managing financial crime. And the reason for that, I suppose, is that it's probably the sector that was the earliest adopter of fintech in the mainstream and has been able to take advantage of some of the activities and operations that have come out of some of the fintech environments, both the bespoke fintech companies and then the larger mainstream banks adopting the technologies. And Niall in particular, I think, is going to be able to shed a lot more light on that and to share his experiences with us. So the program is there's 2 modules. It'll be done one module in trimester 1 of our academic year 21-22. So it's funny talking about 2022 in a nice sunny day in July, but the program will start in October 2021. The first module will finish just before Christmas, and the second module will start in early February and finish by the end of May in 2022. So there's the names of the 2 modules, which will give you a little bit of colour as to what they're about. Without going into detail on it, I suppose this slide, and we will share the slides with you afterwards, just gives you a little bit of colour of what we expect all participants on the programme who successfully complete the programme, the knowledge and skills that they will have gained throughout the course of the programme. So as I said again, the who it's for, and those working or aspiring to work in a professional capacity in the risk of compliance function, or those providing or assisting those functions. So now, what supports do IOB give? So I think this is really important because the program is delivered online, so it's a virtual delivery. You will receive course notes and readings and lots of support stuff in relation to that. And then also Jackie and Frank will be delivering live webinars, 4 or 5 live webinars throughout each module. And they'll be joined by Niall on one of those and various other guests, but they will deliver the core of the program. In addition to that, I suppose from the education and the learning side, so they're your industry experts, I suppose, and practitioners delivering you the content. And then within IOB, myself and the program manager, Mary O'Dwyer, we'll provide you with all the other supports that you need in managing how you learn, helping you manage your time, making sure that you know when things are on, how you get registered to the program, and all of the other sort of admin side behind that. And making sure in particular that you're comfortable in how you do your assessment, because one of the things of an accredited program is it has to be assessed. That's how you demonstrate your learning, I suppose, outside to the outside world. So we'll provide you with all the support on an ongoing basis. We're always here and always available. So to who you really came to hear today, again, from just at the beginning, I introduced the 3 speakers. So just to give you a little bit of colour about each of the speakers, and I have some notes here, so I'll make sure I do everybody justice. But Frank is a recognised expert in financial services regulation and provides practical advice and consultancy to boards and to C-suite executives on all matters relating to the regulation of payment services, to digital banking, to data protection and anti-money laundering. Frank has a long history, and I suppose in the industry, and will be well known to many of you. He also is the Irish representative on various European payment councils, committees and working groups, and he works with BPFI and their Fintech and Payments Association of Ireland. So Frank, we are delighted, and we're going to hear from you very shortly. Frank's co-deliverer on the programme, Jackie Main, is a very experienced risk practitioner. She was head of group operations and payment risk assurance at Bank of Ireland and is now leading her own risk consulting practice. Jackie has an executive master's in risk management and has been very involved with IOB in the past in relation, as has Frank, in relation to the delivery of some of our digital offerings and digital programs. So I'm really delighted that both of you are going to be joining us on and delivering the program. And now I think what's always really, really helpful in the in any I suppose situation is to hear from somebody who's actually doing this every day. The rest of us might be advising or teaching, but somebody who's actually responsible for the implementation of it. So I'm delighted to welcome Niall Buckley. Niall, his recently new title is Head of Commercial Insights and Fintech Engagement with AIB. Niall has over 30 years financial services, you would never know looking at him, financial services experience, primarily in digital and technology in organisations, and has been involved with AIB, previously Bank of Ireland, IBM and Bear Stearns. He also ran his own startup for 3 years in the early 2000s, which I think is really interesting because in the area of fintech, we do have that mix of the traditional banks and all those involved in startups, because that's what a lot of fintechs are. But in his current role, he's responsible for fintech engagement and providing a two-way channel for third parties to engage with the bank. So we can see he's very well equipped for that. And that helps him navigate those third parties to the right internal stakeholders and ultimately to mutually assess partnership potential. So this is all about getting the right people together for the right cause, for the right reason. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Frank and Jackie, and they are going to do the initial presentation. Niall is going to come in with his insights, and then hopefully if you have any questions, you can put them into the chat, and we'd love to hear from you, and we'll open it up at the end. So my next task is just to make sure I actually hand over the slides. So Frank, over to you.
Thanks very much, Evelyn. Is this, are we working here? Have I got control yet?
You do, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks very much. I'm delighted to be part of the program. As you said, I've been involved in a couple of these before, and they've always been great. And this is a particularly topical one at the moment. We've seen recently published survey from the Banking and Payments Federation. Irish banks have developed or invested 3 billion in technology and innovation over the last 5 years, 400 million of which has been in partnership with fintechs. AIB and Ulster Bank have been supporting the Dog Patch Labs in Dublin and the Portershed down in Galway, whilst Bank of Ireland have been setting up their own innovation lab in Camden Street. And the Banking and Payments Federation of Ireland are working hand in hand with the Fintech and Payments Association in Ireland. Why? Why is fintech the buzz? Why is this all happening? What's it all about? Niall, as Evelyn has highlighted, and with his extensive experience, will be talking to us about this from the banking perspective, and why fintech and the engagement with fintech is so important from the banking side. But for now, myself and Jackie want to give you a whistle-stop tour, primarily through module 1, the fintech. The focus today is going to be on the fintech side of it, but we mustn't forget the very important element that is AML, and we will touch on that. But we want to take you through what the program is going to cover. So fintech, what are we looking at? Fintech, or TechFin, as others will call it, is quite simply financial delivery of financial services and the use of technology to do that faster, better, quicker. We've seen the growth in internet, smartphones, all of these wonderful devices that allow us to engage with it in a meaningful way. The pros of this are, when we look at it, is the choice for the customer, the convenience for the customer, and the data-driven personalization of services that we've got used to from our engagements with other non-financial service providers. The downside, and we'll look at some of the risk, obviously, is cybercrime, fraud, and the potential for exclusivity. We need to make sure, as fintech develops and as fintech solutions develop, that they include everybody. Everybody is brought along on the journey. Through COVID, we've seen the move to a cashless environment, and that has impacts for those who aren't as tech savvy or don't necessarily have all the tools to buy into this new wonderful fintech environment. We also need to understand then who were originally what we called as the challenger banks. As fintech started out, these service providers, some providing fuller service offerings and some niche players, but they were very clearly being portrayed as the bank killers. They were coming to get us. This was the new fintech threat for the incumbent financial service providers. What springs to mind are the likes of Revolut, who some will argue aren't a bank, but they are licensed as a bank in Lithuania. N26, Starling, all these new service providers coming in to try and eat away at what the incumbents were doing, but doing it better, faster, and with a better front end in most cases. But are they disruptive? We also have a look at, in terms of fintech and how it pervades everything we do now. We look at the ecosystem and the variety of niche players that have entered into the market, and their ability to start from scratch using this all the new technology, providing them with lower overheads and an ability to change their business models to be able to then provide cheaper, faster, different service offerings to customers. And the buzzword that everybody likes is customer centric, so that we're focused on the customer and what the customer wants. And we have this wonderful map from courtesy of our friends in Fintech Ireland, Peter Oakes and his band of merry men. And what this shows, and this is just what we call indigenous, so these are all Irish firms or Irish regulated, but you'll see the breadth of fintech, from credit and lending, payments, regtech, insurtech. It's can sometimes be thought of very narrowly in terms of payments, and certainly that tends to be where most of the focus is, though Ireland does have a particularly large offering in the RegTech side. But fintech is so diverse. But what all of these guys do, or most of them do, is that they have a specific service. They've focused on something. They've created a new offering. They're delivering a better, more customer-focused service, but solving problems. So if we pick out one or two by way of example, under the credit and lending heading there, you'll see Credit Logic, which to a degree are somewhat of the poster boy at the moment, because the work that Eddie Dillon and Gavin Bennett are doing is fantastic. And they've recently announced a big partnership with PTSB. Again, back to that, is collaboration the way forward. What they're doing, using the benefit of open banking, and we'll see that under PSD2 a little later, but the ability for data sharing to put some color on it. And they are now assisting in the mortgage application process to streamline it. They'll collect all the necessary data for you. You don't have to go around asking everybody for months worth of statements. They'll harvest all that data and package it up and help you submit it, creating a much easier and streamlined process and removing a pain point that most of us have to go through at some stage. On the payment side, you'll see there on the right-hand side in bright pink, Strike. And again, not necessarily a huge player, but again, solving a problem, making life easier for customers, which is what fintechs like to do. So Charles Dowd, formerly of Plink and Facebook, and his colleagues have created basically a contactless solution. They're allowing for digital payments, primarily for service charges or tipping. So for your couriers and delivery people who we always used to have a couple of coins in our pocket, but as we've gone cashless and digital, they don't seem to be there. And this now allows a contactless solution for the tipping that we used to do. On the RegTech side, hiding down the bottom of the third column, and that's Sedici. Rob Leslie and Dave Cunningham doing a wonderful job in there on the digital identity side. And they're providing a solution based on what's known as zero knowledge proof, where you don't need to share all of your credentials. So one of the issues with solving digital identity is to get away from having to tell somebody everything about yourself to prove one thing. So for example, if we always used, if you need to go into a pub, maybe through an app or otherwise, all you need to be able to demonstrate is that you're 18. They don't need to know who you are, where you're from, what you do. They just need to know, are you 18? That's it. So using these technologies, you can just demonstrate that you're 18. You don't necessarily even have to give them your actual date of birth, just verify that attribute. And that's what these guys are all doing, making life easier through technology. Oh, my digital disruption, that is supposed to say digital disruption across the front, if I can just see it there actually in dark writing. So underpinning all of this move into fintech is digital disruption and digital transformation. And this again harps back to the fact that we're harnessing and using technology to better deliver the existing services. And as I mentioned earlier, that's driven through customer expectation. We're used to having personalized and immediate delivery of services from Netflix and all the other big technology providers. And the new way of doing things that the technology allows, we're seeing different models where the delivery of the service is focused more on what the customer wants, rather than the traditional banking model of building something and then selling it to everybody. This uses the data to derive pain points and identify them and solve how we can do things better for the customer, back to that customer centricity. And it's as much a cultural as it is a technologically driven piece. It's a change in mindset. It's not just digitizing existing products, it's allowing technology to change how you deliver that product in through a digital channel. And by and large, what we've seen of late, and back to the investment that the BPFI were highlighting, the incumbents are somewhat playing catch up. The rapid growth has seen them with what people will refer to as legacy technology stacks or infrastructure, and it's somewhat struggling to deliver services at the pace that we see today. And fintechs have harnessed on that or highlighted that. But what we're seeing is that idea of collaboration between the banks and the fintechs, where the banks have the customer base, the fintechs have either the front end or the technology driven service that the customer expects. And by getting together, they can deliver that better. But that's changing the market, and I think that's going to be an aspect of this that Niall is going to examine a little bit later. But one of the significant pieces about digital transformation is the risk. You're changing how you operate, and that changes, either introduces new risks or enhances some of the existing risks. And I know, Jackie, you have some observations on this.
Yeah, so this is obviously a subject that's very close to my heart, living and breathing risk and compliance for my entire career. And one of the things that fintech does so great is in a lot of respects, it enables an awful lot of us to do so much in terms of financial services, but risk exists. You can't do business without risk, and therefore you need to identify it, establish how you're going to manage it, and move forward. So we recognize that moving more towards tech, you're going to see an increase in, cyber risk attacks, and we've seen that over the last few years. Your dependency on third party. We talk a lot about the collaboration between financial industry and fintech. There's an awful lot of collaboration between third parties, so you've got dependencies there. Cloud, if we didn't have cloud, we wouldn't have got through the pandemic. It's very clear that the digitalization, the transformation over the last few years has accelerated through the pandemic to using cloud. However, we're using the same vendors, so there's a little bit of concentration risk there between Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. So we look at that. And your dynamic workforce working from home, and that's the way we're moving forward in terms of depending on technology in your home space, and the compliance program. So I'm just picking out a few here. So, when you're in a fintech environment and you're working with, other financial services, you need to be aware that you have compliance obligations on their behalf, not necessarily just for you, even if you're not regulated. And I'll touch a little bit on that a little bit later on the slides. But risk exists. And through the course of the program, we will discuss and identify how to manage them, what risk frameworks to use. There are plenty out there as examples, and we will take you through a lot of that during the course of the program. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Jackie. Disruption fatigue. One of the things through the program that we're going to look at in terms of understanding fintech models and deployment is both from the consumer side, or what needs to be understood from the consumer side in this space is, are they being bombarded? Is this happening too quickly? How do you manage your customers? And I know from some of the bank engagements I've had, it is, there's, with the consumer protection obligations and keeping your customers informed and everything, the constant bombardment at the moment, particularly say with the rollout of strong customer authentication, both for online banking and more recently in the e-commerce and the card space, consumers are hearing a lot of this. And quite aside from regulatory requirements, when they're seeing all these new products and hearing about blockchain and cryptocurrency, it can be a little off-putting for them. For those of us working in the environment, we can think this is all wonderful and we get it. But there have been enough surveys back when open banking was originally deployed in the UK. The UK government did a survey with the public to see a year in where the consumer is seeing the benefit of this. And I think 70 or 80% of the consumers had never heard of it. And then even when it was explained to them, the vast majority of them still struggled to see the point of it or the benefit of it, and were highly concerned about sharing their data with third parties. So, what we need to look at as part of this in the fintech and operating in it and understanding the risks and the compliance requirements that go with it, but how do you sell fintech? How do you persuade the customers of the benefits of it? We've been trying to tell customers for years that contactless was wonderful and the way forward. And it was only until we were all locked at home and only allowed out to do a bit of shopping and didn't want to touch dirty money anymore that everybody bought into contactless. And once there was that driver or that accelerant, everybody's kind of got, I'm not going back. They look enviously at anybody with an Apple Watch, but tapping phones, tapping cards, cash is severely under threat, but we needed something to convey the benefit of it. And I think that's what we need to do in this space. And even then, as a provider, how are you going to distinguish your product from the vast array of others that are out there? We saw on the snapshot from Fintech Ireland, the ecosystem and the variety of service providers that are out there under the various headings. And you you need to separate yourself from the others and persuade people that not only is your product better than the other new products, but that it has value, it has a benefit, that there's a definite benefit to you using it. Why are you going to adopt it? And I think that's another thing that people struggle with, because as I said, in our bubble, we all get it and we love it and we think everybody else understands it, and we need to develop that out. But in doing that, we need to show, as Jackie mentioned, the consumer protection, which is very, very high on the regulatory agenda, and can't be underestimated. So in terms of regulatory agenda, the other piece then is understanding, are you providing regulated services? There are some in there, back on the credit side, for example, credit lending, one of the examples that was in there was Linked Finance, who provide crowdfunding. And up until recently, they were not regulated. And now they're going to have to be regulated because that whole area of crowdfunding is now subject to regulation. So they're going to have to engage with the regulator. And I think understanding from a compliance perspective how that regulatory engagement operates is very important. So what does the authorization process look like? What is the regulator going to expect to see from you? How can you demonstrate that you have competence to deliver that services, that your processes and procedures take account of all the relevant regulatory obligations that are on you, and that you can deliver on those? Now, in doing that, of course, the regulator does operate under a kind of a proportionate approach. They don't expect a new bank, or the expectations of a new bank will be significantly higher than perhaps of any money provider because of what you're doing and the consumer impacts. But it's very important to understand how that regulatory engagement operates, and that's certainly something we'll be looking at. And in that, am I back again? Yeah. It's increasingly important to understand the scope of the regulatory environment that you operate in. Picking on two here, just the Payment Services Directive, which kind of, to a large degree, kickstarted all of this. We had the original Payment Services Directive and SEPA, which harmonized a lot of the payments environment and some of the financial services across Europe. But PSD2 dramatically increased for fintech because it introduced open banking or access to accounts where the banks had to open up their data vaults and share customer data with these new regulated service providers, the account information service providers and the payment initiation service providers. And additionally, another one here obviously is AML. And as I mentioned, we're going to, half the course or half this program is going to be focusing on AML, because it is of paramount importance in finance these days, particularly as we move into the digital space. And there is significant regulatory expectation from the on the fintechs and of technology in this space, because it's expected that as technology rolls out in that digital environment, that the use of technology, for example, artificial intelligence and robotics, process automation, will facilitate fraud detection, will facilitate the monitoring of transactions as they happen, and also the necessary data sharing to ensure that money laundering is curtailed as much as we can. It also obviously touches then in that space on some of the emerging technologies, which is something we'll obviously be looking at in close detail. But the virtual assets and the virtual asset providers are being brought in to that regulated environment as well. So we'll be looking heavily at cryptocurrency, distributed ledger technology, the applications of those, and how they can assist in this space. Now, it's also important to understand that it's not just, this doesn't just apply to regulated entities. And I know, Jackie, I think the breadth and the application of this is very important.
It really is, because not only if you're servicing a regulated entity, the expectations on you are as high as they would be for the regulated entity. So you have to have a compliance program. You have to consider your obligations under the Consumer Protection Code, for instance, and various others, like if you're dealing in mortgages, you have the Mortgage Arrears Code that may be applicable to you. So, just being a fintech, and often it's the case, you have to consider the obligations that fall under the regulated entity. These include Data Protection Act and various others. So we'll cover that during the course of the programme.
Thanks, Jackie. So not only do you need to understand the environment that you're currently operating in, and subject to the immediate expectations of your regulator and the legal and regulatory provisions, it's also of paramount importance to understand what's coming down the track, because not only is there an extraordinary breadth of regulation, it is ever changing and ever developing. For example, we have the recently distributed EU digital package, which sets up and promotes a regulatory environment to promote a broad-based digital economy across Europe. And underpinning that are provisions for digital payments. The Commission is very, very heavy on promoting instant real-time payments to allow for the faster movement of funds across Europe, and very heavy on digital identity to again promote that broad digital economy. So the whole issue of data sharing and understanding when you have to share, so under open banking, but also the developments in data protection and GDPR, as Jackie mentioned, and the various views from the data protection boards, and how the law is changing on that through the decisions. We're also looking at, as part of that digital package, we touched on it briefly, the developments in cryptocurrencies and how, as we move not only to cryptocurrencies, but central bank digital currencies, how that's going to change again, how fintech operates and how it delivers, or what can be delivered and offered to customers, and how that affects financial services. And we'll be looking at all of these, as I said, emerging technologies and emerging pieces. As part then, as the future of fintech, having looked at and delved into what fintech is, digital transformation, how the risks can be identified and mitigated and dealt with, understanding your regulatory obligations. How does this all play out? Where does this lead? How is it going forward? Are the fintechs still considering themselves as the bank killers? Or is collaboration that we're seeing more and more of, is that going to be the new model as the banks and the fintechs operate together? Niall, I know you have a lot of views on this. Not as an IOB founder, I know you weren't around that long, but having been involved in banking since the late 1900s, as I might say, you're living this on a day-to-day basis. You've seen the change. Your fundamental reason at the moment, as head of fintech engagement within AIB, is to look at how you can engage with fintechs and how that will make the banking world better. So, why is this relevant?
All right, thank you, Frank, for that introduction, late 1900s. All right, let me just request control here. And hopefully.
You have it there now.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So fintech matters. And I suppose really for me, all right, this is a personal view, but why does fintech matter? Fintech matters, and why does it matter for banks? So 4 reasons, right? And again, this is a personal view. You can slice and dice this all sorts of different ways. But fintechs can provide things better, faster, cheaper. Frank said this already. So banks have to do lots of different things, lots and lots of different things. And can fintechs do these things better? And the short answer is, in some instances, they most definitely can. Complementary services. So this is a terrible embarrassment in that it should say complementary and not complimentary, as if for free. So to provide additional services that we don't provide at the moment that are complementary to the services that we do. So I'll never live that down from Frank after this, but I'll crack on. Beyond banking. So this is where things get really interesting. We've got some good examples of that actually recently. So to offer revenue opportunities outside of banking, and that becomes really interesting and really intriguing. And investment opportunities. So why not invest in fintech? Why not generate a return from them? And there's a lot of banks doing that right now. So maybe just taking each one of these one by one. So talking of my age and my duration in financial services. So this is my metaphor for financial services when I started my career. I'd like to point out it was the 1980s, not the 1880s or earlier. But if I look at the evolution since, right, what does it look like today? right? Unfortunately, that shouldn't be there still. So I ignore the thing at the bottom. It's just got so much more complicated. There's so much more involved. And without dwelling on them too much, but when I joined the bank in 1988, there was no internet, right? And think of the revolution that we've had since. I won't go through all of these, but the evolution of digital channels, the evolution of bad actors as well in the mix, to keep us all on our toes. Lots of regulation here too. Lots of different legislation that's kicked in, consumer protection being a very important one. The whole SEPA thing, the establishment of the euro, right? PSD2, 1 and 2, Frank has talked about that. AML we've touched on. FATCA, remote working and the collaborative tooling environment that we all work in. So different, so much has changed. And I guess the emphasis and the point of this is that, I'm sorry now, just that's not rendering brilliantly, but banks cannot do everything themselves, and they cannot do everything well themselves. And that's where I think the opportunity for fintech arises, and embracing partnership, right, with fintechs, and to the whole point of this course, which is careful consideration of the risks, is, in my view anyway, essential to a bank's long-term existence, right, 10, 20 years out. So maybe just as some examples, Irish fintechs that are in this space. So Frank, I have robbed your payment slide. Thank you very much. Although, as you say, it was come from Peter and the guys. I'm just picking two here, just a simple example. So Cambrist, run by Jacob Clapham, right? And I've done them a real disservice in some ways in that I've tried to synopsize their entire proposition into one sentence. But the purpose of doing that is to simply to try and bring home to you guys, what do? They save banks money, right, in terms of foreign currency card transactions. So when our card customers are abroad and they, for example, are in the UK and they might have a transaction in sterling, there is actually a revenue opportunity for banks which Cambrist bring to life, which is really, really interesting. Circuit, I love this company. A small company, and what they are doing is digitizing the auditing process. So, and by auditing, I mean the auditing of a company, so annual accounts and so forth. And it's a horrendous process right now. It's super, super manual, and it's costly. It's costly for the company that's being audited. It's costly for the auditors themselves, and it's costly for the banks because we have to interact in this ecosystem too. And actually what Circuit are trying to do is digitize this entire process, leveraging open banking as well, which is great. And truly, in terms of what they're trying to achieve, everyone genuinely is a winner. So if I move on to complementary services, and again, forgive me again for the misspelling, but who are the Irish fintechs who can offer something over and above what we do at the moment and who could be really interesting for us? So Easy Payments Plus. So for those of you, you may know that you'll see there a very similar logo now to that of Payzone because they were bought by Payzone. AIB in turn have 75% stake in Payzone. And part of the reason that we did this is because we do not have what Easy Payments Plus do, which is what we call payments collection. And I'll just describe it simply there as digital collection of frequented small value payments. So way to pay in the bottom right corner in the same space. But really, when we looked at this, we were saying, this is in the payment space. This is where AIB should play. And yet we don't have a capability here. And so having this complementary service is something we see as providing real value. Loyal App, Patrick, Gary and the guys, love these guys too. So they provide a digital platform and an app that goes with it that essentially allows a retailer run their own loyalty program. So Evelyn, I didn't say this, but actually in a previous life, I ran 2 barbershops. Please don't ask, it's a very, very long story. But actually in the barbershops, I ran digital programs using Loyal App. And this was, if you think of a barbershop for a second, you know, little cards, and you stamp the card when the customer gets their haircut, and eventually you count up to, for example, 6 haircuts and you give them a free one. Loyal App digitizes all of this. Customer comes in, pays by card. On the 6th one, it's free. It's automatic. So really, really impressive stuff. And as I say, that's something that actually AIB Merchant Services, who are merchant services acquiring arm, they have deployed the Loyal App now in terms of some of their service offerings then to AIB Merchant Services merchants. So again, complementary services for customers. So beyond banking, so where things get really interesting. So here I'm going to show you a Singapore website, right? And immediately having a look at that, what would you naturally think? You'd naturally think, well, it's their Daft or My Home or equivalent. And it's not. It's actually DBS Bank. And this is DBS Bank's website. So it's their publicly available website, but you do have to log on to it to truly engage with it. But DBS, they're a huge Singaporean bank. They're huge in Asia, generally speaking. And just to put it in context, they won the best digital bank now 2016, but on the globe, on the face of the planet. So these guys are heavy duty players. And you'll see here you are in a DBS, in a bank website, and you are looking for your properties under their property heading in their marketplace. But they go beyond that. And so if you look top here, so you want to buy or sell a car, you go to DBS. If you want to book your holiday, you go to DBS. And I love this. This is just brilliant, right? If you want to do a bit of shopping, you go to DBS, right? Now, and I think just to give you an idea of the lifestyle in Singapore, that bottle of wine there, have a look at it, right? That's a €400 bottle of wine, Saint-Emilion Grand Cru, that you can buy on your bank website. So I laugh. I think about my wife saying, "What are you doing there?" "Oh yeah, I'm just on Airbnb. You know, what are you doing?" "Yeah, buying €400 bottles of wine. Love it." I guess at a level, right? So, well, what is this? This is a bank owned and branded. So they haven't put themselves at a distance to this. They haven't put it away over here somewhere under some other brand. And what are they doing? They're providing services that are, as very clearly, well beyond banking, powered by fintech partners. And I suppose for us, it might seem a bit out there, but this is where DBS banks see the future. Now, just, I don't know, serendipitously this morning, I saw on Finextra that Revolut have entered into the travel space, exactly the bottom one here, to book accommodation in the UK, and they've released that this morning on the Revolut app. And so we expect to see that come here to Ireland too. But, you know, I'm saying it's a bit out there, but actually it could be far closer than we all think. And then finally, investment opportunities. So just to give you some examples here, I'm not going to dwell on them individually, but many banks are currently active investors in fintechs for financial return, and I should say for strategic alignment as well. So Santander Innoventures recently been named to Muro Capital, but these guys have been up and running for quite a number of years at this stage, and you can see there, smart capital for fintech innovators. Commerce Ventures, essentially a separate arm of Commerce Bank doing exactly the same thing, focusing on Series A and in fintech and insurtech specifically. And we also have closer to home, across the water, we have Barclays and fintech startups under what Barclays called principal investments. So I had a conversation actually with this chap, Andy Chalice, 2 weeks ago, as he explained exactly what their strategy is around that and how Barclays are directly investing in fintech companies in the UK in particular. And again, I don't want to make it look AIB centric, but in Ireland, this is happening too. And you guys will probably have heard that back in 2017, we made an investment in Transformate down in Kilkenny, and also then more recently that acquisition of Payzone. Again, both of those joint ventures with Fiserv. So ultimately, what we're saying is, and what I'm saying is my personal view, is that fintech really does matter in a couple of different ways, a couple of different lenses. And actually, if anything, the importance of fintech for banks is only going one direction, and that's up. So I'll pause there.
Thanks, Niall. That was fantastic. And Jackie and Frank, that was just incredibly interesting. I'm going to come back, Jackie and Frank, and let you ask Niall if you have any questions. But just before we do that, I just want to check in with our participants and just see if we have any questions coming in through the chat. And I don't think we have. So just to say to you guys, if you have any questions for any of our panelists, please put them into the Q&A and we'll pick them up. But otherwise, maybe Frank and Jackie, back to you. Is there anything you want to pick up with Niall? Make it easy, Frank and Jackie.
Well,
nothing hard, yeah.
One that we probably touch on regularly, and it's the whole idea of innovation. And I perhaps have a slightly jaundiced view as to whether we're seeing efficiency or innovation. And I find myself with a lot of the fintech offerings, which are easier to use, possibly cheaper. Revolut does great on, foreign exchange rates, but I still look at them, and maybe it's because I'm so close to it, and I go, that's just a card payment, or, I find myself going, oh, Shania Twain, and going, that don't impress me much. But are you seeing, you're operating closely with it. So where do you stand on innovation or efficiency, or is the innovation still to come? Is that what we're waiting for, and that's what we want to see?
To be honest, Frank, I actually think it's innovation all the way, and that's what I am seeing, right? So I mentioned their Circuit, and I mentioned Cambrist, but there's another company you should watch for. These guys, they're called Offer, OFFR, yeah, a chap called Robert Hoban, and they're looking to digitize the entire home buying process. And actually, again, you know, what are the effects of the pandemic? Well, they've done nothing but drive their business, right? Like the move from cash to cards, their business is just growing and growing. They're growing in Australia. They've got €3 million invested from Barclays there fairly recently, and it is utterly innovative. They have demoed their platform to me, and it transforms banking. When BidX1 came here, Rob is ex-BidX1, and that felt to some degree transformative. This is taking it to a whole other level. We've got companies as well like Trove. So Trove are around, they're an insurtech company since 2012, and they're in the space of micro-duration insurance policies. So we've all grown up with insurance policies typically being annually based. And actually, they have identified use cases where, do you know what? I only need insurance for 2 days, short periods of time, and they've built policies around that. And the last one I'm going to blather on about, if you just give me a second, is in the climate fintech space, which is really burgeoning. And I think there's so much potential in this space. But there's a company in the UK called My Miles. And what they do is they offer car insurance. So again, we're in the insurance space, but for low mileage users. So people who obviously don't drive too much over the year, and they pay by mile. So they pay a flat fee for their car when it's in the driveway in case it's broken into or goes on fire, and then they pay per mile thereafter. And actually, for those customers who are environmentally, how would you say, astute, and who are thinking about the climate, there actually is now a kind of a financial model around car insurance, which is focused on that type of customer. So those are just a few examples.
I think, guys, what I'm finding really interesting as well is the fact that sometimes the question you get asked for people, you know, about like the fintechs versus, you know, the mainstream operators, be it the banks or the insurance companies. But what we're hearing now today, and particularly from you, Niall, is that it's becoming much more collaborative. The bigger mainstream banks and insurance companies that hopefully are going to still be with us for a very long time are embracing and working with the fintechs to make sure that they can, I suppose, enhance their own offerings.
100%, you know, and we've seen, I suppose, you know, going back to the point that you made, Frank, if we were to go back to 2014, it was very much that sense of competitiveness between the traditional banking sector, as an example, and fintech. And we've seen lots and lots of examples where, I suppose, like at one level, it's hard to acquire customers. Hats off to Revolut. They've done a great job. They continue to do a great job. But actually, for a lot of organizations, that cost of acquisition is really, really challenging. So there's actually a kind of what I call a maturation, generally speaking, on both sides of the fence. That's not exactly language I want to use, but where everybody's looking at each other going, actually, collaboration makes an awful lot more sense. And the final thing, Evelyn, and I'll say on that, is what I think what we'll see is the business of large companies who have large customer bases like banks or insurance companies developing their current platforms, which are app-based or internet banking based, but actually spreading them out a little bit like DBS to a broader range of services. Maybe not as radical as TBS at the moment, but there's lots and lots of services in the complementary space that could be added to a bank's digital platform, where fintechs have a lot of opportunity to play on.
Well, actually, just speaking to that, we have a question in just asking, what's the benefit to a bank like DBS in offering a marketplace like they do, and do they make an income off it too?
So that's a really good question, right? I'll be honest, one of because we had a conversation with one of the program leads for their property elements, so not the subsequent pieces that they've launched. One of the pressure points that DBS are under in terms of investors is, well, where are the revenue lines for the future, right? And with with very low interest rate environment right here, right now, we all know that the traditional interest margin business is under intense pressure. So what they're trying to do is, it's experimental, right? So at this stage, could I tell you that they're making a profit on their travel marketplace? I can't. But what they're trying to do is get out there with experimentation with fintech partners, test with customers to see what works and what doesn't work, in testing, looking for those revenue opportunities in the next 5, 10, 15, 20-year timeframe.
Yeah, so customer base seems to be the big driver there.
Yeah.
Guys, I don't see any other questions coming in, so I will allow Jackie, or not allow, but invite Jackie and Frank for last words if they'd like. But I would just like to... Yeah, sorry, go on.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut across. One last bit, which goes to the core of what we're going to do in the program. We just get Niall's quick observations. Is regulation a barrier to entry? Because I think one of the drivers behind all this collaboration that we're seeing is that, yes, the banks have the customer base, but they also have enormous risk and compliance departments who are used to dealing with the regulation that the technology companies simply don't know how to deal with. So is it a barrier to entry? Is it driving the collaboration? And in terms of things to consider and to promote this course, the importance of understanding that those compliance obligations. Any thoughts?
Oh, you're shameless. So to your point, look, at the end of the day, so the challenge, I suppose, for a lot of fintech organizations is even to be aware of and to understand what their regulatory obligations are or are not, as the case may be. Also, maybe just to the broader point that Jackie was making, even if you take regulation aside for a second, and I will come back to it, is risk. So when a bank looks at a fintech, banks are looking at it from a risk lens. So that fintech needs to know what the type of risk that bank will be thinking of and how that fintech can mitigate those. But there is a positivity to regulation. We've experienced it ourselves. We had a relationship, with a UK-based fintech, and actually what actually greased the wheels internally within AIB was that this was an already regulated entity. So the very fact that they were regulated by the FCA and that they were passporting here to Ireland gave actual great assurance to our broad and varied range of stakeholders, who some wouldn't be very familiar with the fintech landscape, and that allowed us to proceed. So I actually see that understanding regulation, understanding risk, and then thinking about that, acting on it, and presenting to a bank with that in mind. But actually from there on, yes, there's effort goes into that, but from there on, I actually think it can be a real bonus.
And we have a lovely comment in here, which goes to my heart, which is, if they agree, Frank, compliance is everything. Jackie, do you have anything you want to add?
I'll just unmute myself there. No, I agree with Niall. I think the challenge that we're seeing in the fintech market is that yes, they are challenged in understanding what their compliance obligations are, and they are going to tender with large banks, and they are having to answer very complicated questions around this regulatory space. And they do get themselves a little, on the challenge side around where their thoughts are in terms of how they're going to maintain compliance. Do they know their obligations? Yeah. And it is where we're supporting them. So it is a challenging space, particularly when you have individuals from technical backgrounds trying to consider risk and compliance and banking, understanding banking. So it is a challenge for them. But if they get the right people with them, they can get through it, so it's fine.
Thanks, Jackie. And just back then, if any of you would like to know a little bit more about the programme, we will be sharing the slides and the recordings with you. They will be available afterwards. There will be details on how you can apply for the programme and the programme brochure. Just to say again, it is for those working in organisations using or looking to use fintech applications, but also for anybody providing services. So anybody in the fintechs, I think, would really benefit from the programme as well, to understand the regulatory environment and the environment in which the organisations they're maybe looking to collaborate with operate within. So for now, just to finish on time and be good corporate citizens in that respect, I want to pay huge thanks to Niall, to Jackie, and to Frank for all the work and the prep they did in getting this event ready. And hopefully it's given you a really good taste of what's to come in the future. So thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you again soon.